like 120 years old. He's going to be dead in a few weeks. All right, there's your context. He is given his last bit of instructions before everyone else goes over and conquers the rest of Canaan. All right, he's on this side of Jordan. He's not allowed to go over. Why? He disobeyed God. At one point, God told him to speak to a rock, and he smacked it with a stick and made a smart aleck comment about, must we fetch water from the rock, ye rebels? And so God told him, no, you didn't sanctify me in the people's eyes, and so he was not permitted to go in. So he has been giving them a second telling of the law. This is the second generation of the Israelites. What happened to the first one? They died. Why? Yeah, because they disobeyed God. It's a good general answer, right? They were supposed to go into the promised land like 38-something years ago, and they didn't because they were scared. They looked, they had some spies go in, and the people were tall, and their walls were strong, and there was a bunch of them. And they said, we can't do it. And so God said, okay, well, then you're not going to go in, and you're going to die in the wilderness. They said, whoa, that sounds rough. We'd like to go in now. And then God said, nope, don't you dare. And they tried to go in, and they got their tails whooped in that fight. And so they have to wander in the wilderness for the remainder of that time. They're all dead. Now their kids are grown up, and that's who he's talking to here. So in our previous chapter, in chapter 14, we had some various and sundry laws, rules, and regulations about what you could eat, where you could wear, how you governed yourself, of how you would mourn if somebody died, and then even how they would bring in a tenth of everything that they grew or produced to give in accordance with the law to tabernacle and the Levites and all that. So all those rules. So we're continuing in chapter 15. In verse 1, it says, at the end of every 7 years, thou shalt make a release. A release is a remission of a debt. A release. All right, so Elijah, you owe me $7. And you don't pay me. You don't pay me. You don't pay me. After 7 years, I would just have to forgive you. As in, it goes away. Right? So that's the general rule. Every 7 years, thou shalt make a release. And then it's going to explain how that needs to happen. So verse 2, this is the manner of the release. Every creditor that lendeth aught unto his neighbor. Aught just means anything, no matter what you're lending. Whether you're lending clothing, food, money directly, whatever it is, he shall release it. He shall not exact it of his brother, of his neighbor, or of his brother, because it is the Lord's release. All right, what's the difference between a neighbor and a brother? Anybody dwelling in Israel's borders is going to be considered a neighbor. A brother would be any of the natural descendants of Abraham. Okay, so that smart aleck lawyer who later asked Jesus, well, who's my neighbor? He was wanting a narrow constriction because there's an exception for this rule that it didn't apply to foreigners, right? Those outside of Israel. That word foreigner is a different word that was used to translate as a sojourner or an alien or a pilgrim. Those are people who are abiding in Israel. So within Israel's borders, anyone that you loan money to in the 7th years, you are going to forgive it. Whether they're Israelite or not, it is the Lord's release. All right? Who's telling you to do it? God. The Lord, right. Of a foreigner thou mayest exact it again, but that which is thine with thy brother thine hand shall release. Yes, sir? Exact. Means require it to be paid. It doesn't mean no, it's just saying that you can require the repayment of the debt. Only for the foreigner. Now, there's an exception for that. If you get to the time when there are no poor people among you, then you can require your brethren to pay it back. So who is this primarily benefiting? Poor people, right? This is there was no bankruptcy court back then, right? When people get into such deep debt today, they can go to bankruptcy court and they can kind of get a clean slate and start over. This was God's provision for those who were in financial straits and difficulties, where they were in such debt, they could start over after 7 years. Okay? So this rule would apply except for when there's no poor people among you. For the Lord shall greatly bless thee in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for inheritance to possess it. All right? You are going to be so wealthy in this land that you're going to be able to forgive these things. All right? Does that make sense? So it's the Lord requiring it because he's given you so much more. All right? Only if thou carefully hearken unto the voice of the Lord. There's a condition on the Lord greatly blessing all that they did. Blessing their flocks, blessing their herds, blessing their crops. If thou carefully hearken unto the voice of the Lord. What's it mean to hearken, kids? Listen. Carefully hearken unto the voice of the Lord. To observe, means look at something. So listen, look, and then to do all these commandments which I command thee this day. All right, so they've actually got to follow through in obeying the Lord. Verse 6, for the Lord thy God bless thee as he promised thee. Blesseth thee. That's ongoing blessing. As he promised thee. And thou shalt lend unto many nations, but thou shalt not borrow. And thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee. So there's going to be such an abundance of wealth, if they're obedient, that as a nation, Israel will be able to be a lender to foreign countries. Right? Foreign countries, right? What's the U.S. has a little bit of debt, right? It's not ours. We've got to borrow it from other countries. And so that's what Israel was doing. They were being a lender rather than a borrower. You shall reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee. As long as Israel was obedient, those statements were true. When they disobeyed, when they started serving other gods, when they started to not practice these things, God would bring other nations to rule over them, right? That whole book of Judges is going to be this period of, we're obeying for a time, no, we're not. And then they would be invaded and conquered by a foe, and the Lord would allow them to stay there for years until he raised up a judge to redirect them back to obedience, and then they would be able to be independent again. All right. Verse 7. Here's another general rule. If there be among you a poor man of one of thy brethren within any of thy gates in thy land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not harden thy heart, nor shut thy hand from thy poor brother. All right. If you knew that there was a general rule that every 7 years you were going to have to forgive a debt, what is the man's natural response to hearing that? Well, good grief, I don't want to lend anybody anything. Particularly not a poor person, because they're much less likely to pay me back. So this is a companion rule that goes with the first. If there be any poor man of your brethren, so we're talking about Israelites, within any of thy gates, so in any of the cities, doesn't matter where he is in the land, you shall not harden your heart, nor shut up your hand from thy poor brother, but thou shalt open thine hand wide unto him, and thou shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he wanteth. So God is requiring not only for there to be the forgiveness of the poor, but he's also requiring that you extend credit to them. Right? He is blessing you with so much when you're there and you're obedient. You will have an abundance, but that abundance is conditioned on your obedience, including not being hard-hearted and stingy about lending to the poor. Now, this is not just giving it away. Is there a good chance that some of them won't come back? Yeah, probably so. But the general rule is that you must. You should see someone in genuine need, and that want there is not, well, I want a Corvette. It's I'm lacking. There's something that I don't have as a need. All right. So you're lending unto the poor so that they can have food and clothing. Right. Those needs. Beware that there be not a thought in thy wicked heart, saying, the 7th year. That 7th year, it's at hand. The year of release is at hand, and thine eye be evil against thy poor brother, and thou givest him naught. All right, because what's man's natural inclination? Because this is a 7-year cycle, right? It's going to keep up with it. This is not 7 years from when I lend you something. It's every 7 years. If it's getting close to that 7th year, and this brother comes to you and says, I need, to borrow some money so we can, eat. And you say, gosh, man, it's awful close to that 7th year. The odds of me getting repaid are pretty slim. He said, that's a wicked thought in your heart. You're being covetous. You're trying to look for a way out of doing what you're supposed to do. And so if you give him nothing because you've considered that, what will the poor man do? He'll cry unto the Lord against thee. What does he have to cry? Lord, he's disobeying you. You told him to be merciful and to lend with an open hand. And so that failure to obey and to lend to that poor person, it says it's a sin unto thee. Right? Thou shalt surely give him, and thine heart shall not be grieved when thou givest unto him. All right. New Testament language says, the Lord loveth a cheerful giver. Right. And so this is the same concept. You shall surely give it to him, and you shouldn't be just anguishing and grousing over what you are lending to him. Why? Because that for this thing the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thy works and in all that thou puttest thy hand unto. The Lord is already blessing them abundantly, and being obedient into this matter that goes against their carnal nature, it says the Lord will bless them even more. Okay, so there's both a carrot and a stick and another carrot. What that means? Something good, a deterrent, a consequence. If it's a sin unto you if you don't do it, and then there's additional blessing. So it's wise, right? Now, this kind of harkens back to the other time of when will this rules about release not apply. It says, well, it didn't have to apply when there's no poor in the land. Then you get to verse 11. The poor shall never cease out of the land. What did Jesus say when Judas got all bent out of shape because someone had broken an alabaster box and poured it on Jesus' feet? Man, this could have been sold and given to the poor for 300 pence. That's like a year's wages. Okay, it's a lot of money. And he didn't say that because he cared about the poor, but he carried the bag and he was interested in what went in it. And Jesus said, the poor have ye always with you, right? But me you have not always. And so she's done this, anointed my body unto my death. So the poor shall never cease out of the land. There will always be someone in need. Right? There will always be someone who is poor. Therefore I command thee, saying, thou shalt open thy hand wide unto thy brother, to thy poor and to thy needy in thy land. Right? So this was a narrow rule. It didn't apply to every person across the globe, but God was saying to the Israelites, within Israel, you had to show a special level of love and mercy for the poor within your land. Okay? Any questions about that, Patrick? So what's the general rule? Help. Okay, every 7 years there's going to be a release. All right, and a release means to let go of the debt, forgiveness. Forgiveness, that's interesting, isn't it? What does Jesus use to illustrate us forgiving other people who wronged us? Forgiving of debts. Right? That's the parable that Jesus goes. There's one man who owed his king, 10,000 talents or whatever. So just imagine $1 billion. All right, a super wild amount of money. And he didn't have it to pay, and the king required of him. And he said, please, king, give me time, I'll repay it. The king's ready to throw him in jail. And instead, the king forgives him all of it, lets him go free. Wow, what a relief, right? What does that man go do? He goes and finds a fellow servant who owed him $5. And he grabs him by the collar and says, you give me that money, I'm going to throw you in jail. And the guy falls to his knees and says, please, just give me time. I will pay you all. Just give me time. And he wouldn't. And he took the guy and he chunked him into jail until he paid him the $5. Now, the other servants of that king heard about that, and boy, were they upset. And then the king found out about it, and he was upset. And he calls that wicked servant and he says, I forgave you that large debt. because you asked me to, not because you paid it off. Surely you should have shown the same kind of forgiveness of letting go of that debt to your fellow servant. That illustration is a connection between our sins to God that were forgiven by Jesus' sake. That's the $1 billion, right? The volume of sins that we've committed against God is inordinate, right? We can't even measure it. That's what Jesus has forgiven, right, for his sake, by his blood. And yet when somebody wrongs us, we want to hold them over the fire and beat the tar out of them because we don't want to forgive. So the pattern for us is, as God has freely forgiven us, we should forgive others, right? And it uses that debt correlation to teach that. So even all the way back in here, he is teaching about this people who have been given a great deal should regularly forgive, regularly, for the Lord's sake, right? And it's for their best interest to do so. Cool? All right, so that was your New Testament pull forward. All right, going back to the Old Testament. Verse 12. If thy brother, an Hebrew man, or a Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee, and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let him go free. All right. At this time, one practice for handling debts was you could sell yourself into slavery. All right. It's like indentured servitude until your debt was paid off. For general rule among most nations, there's not a whole lot of protection for the guy who's selling himself. But in the way God's designing this nation, that for his people, that when they go into debt and they can't pay it and they sell themselves, their labor, sell it in advance, basically, the most that the person who bought them can benefit from that is 6 years. Okay, 6 years, and then in the 7th year, as it starts, you let them go free. Now, someone who is poor and has sold themselves in slavery, they probably don't have much stuff. Well, the instruction is then you're not to let them go empty-handed. Because if you do that, what's going to happen? They'll be right in the same boat. Right? So you're going to start them off on a better path. When you send them out free from thee, you shall not let them go away empty. You shall furnish him liberally. All right, that's an abundance. Out of thy flock, out of thy floor, and out of thy winepress. Now, I picked up some Legos on our floor this evening. Is that what it means, out of the floor? No, it's talking about the threshing floor, right? That's where you beat out your grain that you've been gathered. And so you're giving him some flocks, cattle. You're giving him some food and grain out of your wine press. So he's got food, he's got wine, he's got cattle that you are starting them out on this new life of that wherewith the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, thou shalt give it to him. All right? What's the reasons? 1, you shall remember that thou wast a bondman in the land of Egypt. He's talking to some people who were actually there in Egypt, right? These were eyewitnesses. Now, they were under 19 when they came out, but they remember being slaves in Egypt. It says, you were a bondman in Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed you. To redeem you means to make you free from your slavery. The Lord redeemed you, therefore I command thee this thing today. Okay, so God, who redeemed the whole people, is saying, I'm not going to allow you to enslave each other. Okay, 6 years, you can get some labor out of them. And later it described as that, it shouldn't even be hard for you to send them away because that labor that he gave you is worth double if you'd hired a servant for the same time. Probably because the Lord's blessing their efforts for the Lord's sake more so than just a hired servant. But the same way that I redeemed all of you, you should redeem and let them go free because you remember what it was like to be a slave. Okay? Now, the servant does have a choice. All right? One benefit about being a servant is that you weren't responsible for managing food, managing a household, managing clothing. Right? That was the master's job. He had to care for all those things. And so there's a situation where the servant, he may not want to. This was his choice. This was voluntary. You couldn't force him. And if it shall be said, if he say unto thee, I will not go away from thee. So he, says, I don't want to go. I'd rather remain your servant for the rest of my life. Obviously, it's a good situation. Because he loveth thee in thy house, because he is well with thee, his life is good. Then thou shalt take an awl and thrust it through his ear unto the door. So a piercing of his ear to acknowledge that that's a permanent position that he's asked for. And he shall ever be thy servant forever. He shall be thy servant forever. And thou shalt also, and also unto thy maidservant thou shalt do likewise. So it doesn't matter if it was man or woman. It was their choice if they wanted to continue to stay beyond that 6 years. But unless they elected that, you had to let them go free, and you had to give them a good starting point. Now, practical, did they actually follow through on this? God said to do it, but did they actually do it? We don't really find an example of where they did. We know that much later, in Jeremiah's day, right before they go into captivity, the rich folks there were really upbraided by the prophet because they were holding their slaves permanently, and the leader said, "Okay, we'll let them go." And then, not a few weeks later, they basically go and recapture them all again. And Jeremiah's like, "You said you were going to do it. You all agreed you were going to obey, and now you're not." And then, what winds up is, Babylon comes and takes them all away. It's kind of like this final straw. Then after they've got 70 years in captivity with Babylon and released by the Persians, they're coming back, and what are they doing in Nehemiah and Ezra's day? They have got these very strict laws elsewhere, we won't get into it today, about not charging each other interest, like among their brethren. They've had to mortgage off their lands, and they're having everything charged interest. And these rules of mercy for the poor and not preying on them with predatory lending, they're ignoring them even after the captivity. So they're very good, but men are really terrible about following through on them. All right? So verse 18 says, "It shall not seem hard unto thee when thou sendest him away from thee, for he hath been worth double a hired servant to thee in serving thee 6 years. And the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all that thou doest." So again, obeying to let them go was to their benefit. They were blessed while they was their servant, and they'll be blessed when they obey. Does this sound at all like what went on in America with the slave trade? No. Permanent slavery, multi-generations. This is people who try to say, well, the scripture supports slavery. This is a very radically different concept that God had laid out of what was permissible versus really the kind of horrors that we saw here. And so we've got to be careful when people make blanket statements as, well, the Bible supports such and such. Well, let's go see what it actually says. And that takes more than just looking at one verse.
So since you brought up American slavery, modern day slavery, when did it change?
Well, the practices that happened in American slavery and modern day slavery, those have been going on all along. This was the change that God was setting. This is something new. This is something different. And this was to the nation of Israel.
There was actually slavery as American slavery.
And before, at the time of Moses in different parts of the world, that the same practice where you see men capturing other men and selling them, the Bible describes that as a man-stealer, and that was a capital offense under the law. That was something that would get you executed. So this was the difference. All that, what we've seen is the norm of men being men and awful to each other. Product of sin. All right. So we've dealt with 2 general rules, 3, I guess. About a year of release, what that looks like with debts, releasing. Now, the hired brother, does he get let go on that rotating cycle every 7th year, or does it 6 years of their actual work? Everything I've read, they actually had to work the 6 years, so it wasn't necessarily the year of Jubilee that they're released, but after serving the 6 years, versus just the monetary debts. Now there was, it's in Leviticus, there's talked about, you've got these years of release, right? Every 7 years you have a year of release. Well, when you've got a series of those, it's the 7th one, so this would be the 49th and 50th year, there's a major release, right? And that's my word. It's called the year of Jubilee. And so this involved forgiving monetary debts. The year of Jubilee, every 50th year, would involve a reallocation of the inherited land back to the family it belonged to. So as a father, I couldn't sell my inherited land permanently away. At most, I could sell it for a long-term lease of 50 years. Because in the 50th year, it's going to revert back to whoever's next in line if I'm dead. So it prevented fathers from disinheriting their children down the line. And so even if you got into a bad situation and got into debt and poverty and everything, there would be this reshuffling where the rich didn't just amass up all the land, it was just went back to who it belonged to before in inheritance.
So multiple years of people.
Yes, so every 7 years was a year of release. Every 7th time that occurred was a year of Jubilee, which is the big release. Where
it began, so you may have gone over your one. The first 7 began when?
I would assume when they went into the land, because that would be in just 50 days or so. So the price you would sell land for was really a long-term lease. It would be a difference between how many years remain between now and the next year of Jubilee. So if the next year of Jubilee is 49 years away, I'm selling you the right to use this land for 49 years. If it's only 8 years away, then obviously the value is much less because you wouldn't have the ability to use the land for beyond that term. It's kind of complicated. Does that make sense? All right. Verse 19, all the firstling males that come out of thy herd and of thy flock, thou shalt sanctify unto the Lord thy God. What's it mean to sanctify? Set them apart as holy, right? What happened to all the firstborn in Egypt? Man and beast. The Egyptians, they all died. And God told the Israelites, I have bought you, I have redeemed you, all your firstborn belong to me. Rather than taking the people, I'm going to take the Levites, that tribe, to be in exchange. But all the firstborn of any of your animals going forward, they belong to God. Now, and so if they're clean animals, they have to be sacrificed. If they're not a clean animal, they had to be slain. If you had an animal that was supposed to be sacrificed, could you say, well, I'm going to sacrifice him, I will, but in the meantime, I'm going to hook my young ox up here, and I'm going to do some plowing, or I've got this lamb, I'm going to shear, I'm going to get some wool out of him, I'm going to get some benefit before I turn him over to the Lord. Is that allowed? No, because the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel, belongs to God. His labor, his wool, and so you shall do no work with the firstling of thy bullock, nor shear the firstling of thy sheep. So don't attempt to get any kind of productive value out of this animal. It rightfully belongs to God. What are you going to do with it? You shall eat it before thy Lord thy God year by year in the place where the Lord shall choose, thou and thy household. What's the name of the place the Lord eventually chooses? What city, Patrick? The city that God eventually chose? Jerusalem, right. What's the city that was before then? Shiloh, right? So Jerusalem, that's where they would go and they would eat these firstlings in addition to bringing their first fruits and their tithes and all the other offerings that they were supposed to bring. Now, if that firstling happens to be a little funky, if he's born with a blind eye or 3 legs or whatever, if he had any kind of blemish, as if it be lame, right? It can't walk, or blind or have any ill blemish, thou shalt not sacrifice it unto the Lord thy God, all right? This was another problem that would happen in the book that you asked about, in Malachi. Malachi is the last book written before you go radio silence, before the New Testament. This is after the captivity, and people were still going through the motions of worshiping God, but they were really giving him the sloppy seconds. Like, okay, we're supposed to worship a sheep. All right, I got this funky 3-legged, blind, scrawny thing that's not going to produce good wool. I'm going to offer that. All right, and so they're just taking the sorriest stuff and giving it forward. And Malachi, speaking on God's behalf, is saying, Would you offer that to your governor? There wasn't a king at this time. There was only governors after the captivity. It's part of how you can know the timing. Would your governor be happy if you chose the funkiest, ugliest, right? The thing that, wouldn't make grade, right? What's your grades in chicken? No grade. Would you take your no grades and offer it to the governor if he's coming to dinner? No. So why would you give your no grades to God? Right? That's what he's saying here. So if those firstborn are a no grade, they've got all these issues, don't sacrifice to the Lord. But we're not going to waste them. You will have the opportunity and the right to just eat them as if you would a regular animal. You'll eat it in thy gates. The unclean and the clean person shall eat it alike. The holy thing that was given to God, you had to be ceremonially clean in order to eat it, right? Your regular meals at your house, it didn't matter if you were unclean. Now, unclean was a very broad category. Like, you've got an upset stomach, right? You got diarrhea, that's considered unclean, all right? Ladies, certain time of month, like there's just a lot of different things that you were not ceremonially clean, and so you couldn't go eat those holy things. But that was very rare. The general rule of eating in your home was fine either way. And so he's saying for these animals that were not, that were reserved for the Lord because they were firstborn, but because they had a blemish, you were still allowed to eat them, and there was no special, holy status on them. Eat them as the roebuck and the hart. What are those two things? Deer, right? I've been deer hunting lately, right? So how you were able to eat the wild animals that you hunt, the same thing with these animals. One restriction, only thou shalt not eat the blood thereof, thou shalt pour it upon the ground as water. And that's repeated several times in this book. The general rule across all the scriptures, don't drink blood, right? Okay. I'll for quiet. Okay. All right. So I'm going to turn off the camera, and then we can ask questions.